Hello, welcome to the Sharing Studio. My name is Eileen Trestain. Please join me and my friends as we share our sewing and crafting skills with you in the Sharing Studio. This video is a basic sewing lesson on how to thread hand sewing needle and tie some simple knots. I'm going to demonstrate to you using a plastic canvas needle and a number 8 size crochet cotton so that you can see well in the demonstrations. And then later I will show you sewing with a regular hand sewing needle. First of all, you should remember needle safety. Always have a pin cushion or other receptacle for your sewing needles at hand while you're hand sewing, so that you have a place to rest that needle when you have to step away for a few minutes. Never use the arm of a sofa or the chair, and don't put pins and needles in your mouth. So let's begin with threading the needle. Remember that thread has a nap. Usually it goes from the cut end of the thread towards the spool. The other direction is slightly more rough. So when you are threading your needle, you should use the end of the thread, go through the eye of the needle, and then cut your thread to length. The most desired length is from your wrist to your thumb tip, and then down your arm to your elbow. And that is where you would cut the thread, is at the elbow. The smooth length of thread should be from the eye of the needle all the way down to your elbow where you tie the knot. You don't double your thread, because if you double the thread, you have the two different textures working against each other, and that causes more tangles while you're sewing. Sometimes you'll want to use a longer thread for specific jobs, such as gauging a skirt or basting a quilt. But most of the time, the length you want is this. If I'm going to thread the needle and I am right-handed, I should hold the needle in the left hand. And I'm going to put these two knuckles here from the thumb together. That gives me stability as I'm trying to thread the needle. If I don't put them together, I can end up wavering with my hand trying to find the eye. But if I put them together, my hand will become stable, and then I can put these fingers also next to these. My thread is held between the thumb and the first finger of my dominant hand, and the needle is held in the other. I'm going to put the thread through the eye of the needle, and as I approach the eye, I'm going to open my fingers up around the needle and close them on the back side, and that's how I'm going to get my thread into the eye of the needle. If I'm left-handed, I'm going to do it the opposite direction. My dominant hand holds the thread. It always knows what it's doing, whereas their not dominant hand or recessive hand doesn't have as much control. So again, I'm going to put the knuckles of the thumbs together, the eye of the needle looking at me, and directing with the first finger and the thumb of my dominant hand to go through the eye of the needle, opening my fingers, wrapping around the needle, and grasping the thread from behind. This knot is frequently used by quilters. It makes a very small, very neat knot, and you can do it quite quickly. So I'm right-handed. I'm going to put my thread down the first finger of my left hand and put my thumb on top. I'm going to lay my needle on top of the thread in between the thumb and the finger. Then I have this big loop. I'm going to take this loop where it comes off of my first finger of my recessive hand, and I'm going to use my dominant hand to wrap the thread around my needle. 1, 2, 3. You may use only 2 twists. Any more than 3 is unnecessary. I'm going to then take this thread and I'm going to pull it down between my thumb and my finger. That will keep my loops tightly around the needle and pull them in between my finger and thumb. Then I'm going to let go of the loop and push the needle up, and then grasp the needle and pull it through the loops that are between my finger and thumb. You can't see them, but you can feel them. And if you let go, your knot is gone. So continue to pull all the way up until the knot appears. I'm going to do that now as if I were left-handed. The tail of the thread goes down the first finger of the recessive hand. The thumb goes on top. The thread goes on top of, the needle goes on top of the thread. The thread comes up 1, 2, 3 around the needle. It gets pulled down in between the thumb and the first finger of the recessive hand. Then you let go of the loop and push the needle up until you can grasp the tip. Don't let go of those loops. Pull the needle up and through. Don't let go of the loops or you won't have a knot. There you go, a knot. Like I said, that's when you want very small knots. Next, I'm going to show you one that for fun, we call it Big Fat Spider. You don't need to hold the needle for this one. If you're right-handed, you put the thread over the first finger, put your thumb on top, wrap the thread somewhat loosely around the fingertip, crossing the 2 threads on your finger. Do one more loop around your finger. Put your thumb on top of where all of those cross and begin to roll with the thumb, and then pull back with the first finger. You see all that twisting that's happening there? Put your second finger on top and pull the thread. And what do we get? A big fat spider. I'm going to try it now with the left hand dominant. Put the thread on top of your first finger. Wrap it around and cross over. Wrap again and put your thumb on top of that cross. Roll it off with your thumb to begin, and then withdraw this finger. Put the second finger on top and pull, holding all of those twists in between your fingers and thumb. Big fat spider. Useful if you're going to do basting stitches that you want to pull out later on. My needle goes in. It advances by pushing with this finger. So up, down, alternating up and down. This is a running stitch. And then I'm going to pull my needle through. And you can see that big fat knot helps to hold it in place for the moment. If I'm doing fine sewing, I also want a very fine knot, so this isn't something I would sew a seam with. But I do want to show how to finish with a small knot. So if I've sewn my seam, then I'm going to come back here where this thread has come out. I'm going to take a very small stitch next to that thread, and that gives me a single loop. To tie a knot, I want to go back through that loop with my needle. And that's going to create a secondary loop. See, here's the first one, here's the second one. I want to go back through that second loop and then slowly pull up, straight up from my fabric. And you see what happens with all those loops? They tighten down to make a nice, neat knot. I'm going to do a couple more stitches so we have a little space in between. And I'm going to show you that knot again. I use this knot to end most of my seams. I'm going to take a tiny stitch. I am going to make a loop with my thread, and I'm going to go through that loop. Here's my first loop. Here's my second loop. I want to put my needle through the second loop, and I'm going to pull my thread straight up to make the knot. If I'm left-handed, then I need to sew from left to right. So I'm going to take a few stitches. I'm not very good at it because I don't practice my left hand stitching very much. I'm going to take a small stitch. That gives me a loop, and I don't want my loop to twist, but he wants to. Then I'm going to go through the first loop to make that secondary loop, and I'm going to go through the second loop and pull it straight up from my fabric to make my knot. One more time. I'm going to take a stitch, and that gives me a loop. I'm going to go through the first loop and back through the second loop and pull straight up. To end my threads, if I run my needle back underneath those threads, my thread will stay in place and it won't show through.